Folks, it's time. It is time for the final part of this series. Finally time to cover the game's hardest and most hidden areas, and then to end our journey within the base of the Erdtree. For anyone new who might just be joining the party here in part 3, the purpose of this series is to provide commentary and analysis on key elements of this vast game, covering bosses, levels, characters, mechanics, and anything else I find interesting. I've never aimed to cover absolutely everything at every area throughout this commentary, but instead I've focused on key standout elements that I consider worth discussing, based on my experience throughout this playthrough and my several previous playthroughs of the game. Also, let me be clear that I'm not a lore hunter or lore expert, so please don't expect any in-depth interpretations or theories from me as far as that is concerned. It's just not my forte. That said, I will still provide nuggets of lore from time to time just to give things more context. In part 2, we progressed further on with Ranni's questline, taking us far below ground to Siofra River, and then eventually higher to the eternal city of Nokron, where we retrieved its hidden treasure, the Fingerswear Blade, delivering it into the hands of the Lunar Princess. We also conquered Caelid and took down the great Scourge of the Stars, General Radagon, before ascending skyward to Altus Plateau, then travelling eastward to Leyndell, where the Omen King Morgott was defeated, and then westward to the dark, jagged landscapes of Mount Gelmir, where we slew Praetor Rykard within his blasphemous lair. And thus, for this final video, we'll be covering all remaining areas, those being Nokstella, the Mountaintops of the Giants, Crumbling, Faram, Azula, the Consecrated Snowfields, Mohgwyn Palace, and then the Haligtree, before the final confrontation within the Erdtree. There's a lot to talk about, folks, and if you're still here after watching parts 1 and 2, then I cannot thank you enough for sticking around this long and enjoying my stuff. It sure does mean a lot. And if you're new here, then please consider giving this video a like if you find yourself enjoying it, and hey, maybe you can even subscribe if you want, to see more stuff like this from me in the near future. And with all that being said, I think it's high time we got started. So although my last act in the previous video was to ascend Mount Gelmir to take out Rykard, my last major story act was of course defeating Morgott, followed by the revelation that impenetrable thorns barred the way to within the Erdtree, prompting Melina to appear with a plan to set the Erdtree aflame using the Flame of Ruin found on the Mountaintops of the Giants, located far higher than even the Altus Plateau. Seems like a bit of an extreme suggestion to be honest, but hey Melina, you know best. She gifts us the Rolled Medallion to be used at the Grand Lift of Rolled, obviously, at the end of the Forbidden Grounds beyond Leyndell. However, before I continued on with the story, there was still Ranni's questline to complete, and so I went to work bringing that to its conclusion so as to unlock the Age of the Stars ending. So after ascending to the top of the Liurnia Divine Tower and discovering the charred corpse of her original body, as we did in the last video, Ranni will leave her tower entirely, and indeed back when we gave her the Fingerswear Blade, she effectively thanked us for our service and said a fond farewell. However, if you return back to the Three Sisters area of Liurnia and ascend the tower to the right, Renna's Rise, which was previously sealed off, you'll discover a mysterious portal at the top, and it turns out that this is certainly not the last we see of Lunar Princess Ranni. Although we previously visited another underground location as part of this questline, that being Siofra River to the south, this portal drops us down into Ainsel River to the west, and we even get a fun miniature doll to keep us company as we make our way downriver in this mysterious new location. Except, sitting at the nearby Point of Grace gives the option to talk to the doll, like a freak. No response. Oh well, it didn't work, so let's carry on through the level. I tried it, and got back literally no response or anything suggesting I should try again, so the game is telling me this isn't working right now. Let's continue on through the level, except no. You need to select the option to speak to the doll 3 times before Ranni will start responding and engaging you in conversation. I know I've said the following words a lot throughout this series, but once again I initially missed this on my first playthrough. And I have to give myself at least some credit and assume that I wasn't the only one who gave up trying to talk to the doll after the first or second attempt. Even if they'd made the second response you get here in some way different to the first, to vaguely encourage the player to keep trying, I'd have understood, but they didn't. So I originally explored the entire area ahead without realising you actually can talk to the doll. Needless to say, I'm not a fan of this approach to quest design. Once Ranni realises that we've seen through her ingenious disguise though, she gets a bit pissed off and tells us that to make up for it, we need to help her out by eliminating the baleful shadows from this land. Sure, let me get right on that. Ainsel River is far less open than its sister location, Siofra River, and in fact this is sadly a no-torrent zone, though the ruins and tight caves which follow certainly don't require much leaping and galloping in the way that Siofra did. Again, we're faced with many claymore enemies which I rarely bothered engaging, but the real anomaly here is the grotesque hanging monstrosity with its cracked skull head and enormous pincers. Now, although it might not seem too obvious initially, this is essentially the same species of being as the full-grown falling star beast we encountered atop Mount Gelmir, as inferred by the pincers and the large single eye which darts around from beneath its cracked skull, except this one is at a later stage in its life cycle, like the butterfly is to the cocoon. Although these creatures do look like something you shouldn't get anywhere near to, they actually are far more of a threat at range, hurtling pieces of debris at you with the power of gravity magic, as indicated by the distinctive purple aura surrounding it while it charges up for the next attack. Up close though, they're surprisingly weak, kinda like the Hydra from Dark Souls 1. Ainsel River is initially made up of ruins and caves, crawling with enormous ants, feeding on rotting stacks of corpses. But there's one type of ant enemy in this game that I've always found really gross, these ones with the massive heads. You can even use their head as a literal shield later on, but I've always found them too hideous to use for this purpose. Get away from me, please. Following the caves to one exit leads to this scene of petrified groups of corpses, many with stony hands raised as if in worship to the inexplicably large figure on this elevated ornate throne. But as we see upon approaching further, this is also a boss arena, presenting the Dragonkin soldier of Nokstella. This is honestly one of my favourite enemy designs in the game, and I love all the different types of dragons and dragon variations Elden Ring throws at us, like the Dragonkin, magma worms, the lesser dragons, and the named dragons, the ancient dragons, the immobile dragons, the dead dragons, and certainly this dragon. As cool an enemy as this is, it's unfortunately not unique, because another one appears just a bit beyond in a subsequent area of the Ainsel River, as well as the bothersome ghost version of it in the Consecrated Snowfields later on. Although the Dragonkin's attacks are largely based around savage swipes and slams as it crawls around the arena on all fours due to its malformed nature, in Phase 2 it spreads its useless tattered wings in desperate imitation of the dragon it would never be. From here it'll use ice lightning attacks, immersing the area in violent bolts and shockwaves of frozen thunder, causing high damage as well as frost buildup, not unlike the ghost flame used by the Deathrite bird. Very cool optional boss, and surprisingly easy to miss. In fact, a lot of the underground sections of the game are easy to miss if you aren't taking part in Ranni's questline. At the other end of the network of caves and ruins, we come across yet another eternal city, Nokstella. Design-wise, it's really rather similar to Nokron, complete with many of the same enemies, such as these female Nox warriors and Silver Tears, although now some Silver Tears are imbued with lightning, which is great because they'll ooze towards you in tight groups, and killing one will cause it to explode, setting off a chain reaction where tons of them can die, providing a good opportunity to pop a gold pickled foul foot for some extra runes. Again, my favourite ball is here. I think I've talked about this fella in all three parts of this series. I love him, or I love it. At the end of the sequence of chambers and stairs which make up most of Nokstella, and after passing through a shitty cave filled with swarms of death-blighting basilisks, we come across the baleful shadow which Ranni earlier mentioned. Very confusing when you see this thing because of the fact that it's identical to Blaidd, except red. But although the shadow shares the half-wolf's likeness, it is not actually him, instead being an assassin of sorts sent by Ranni's two fingers, the two fingers she once escaped by sacrificing her true body on the night of the Black Knives. After beating the shadow, Ranni again bids us farewell, but again, this isn't farewell because the questline is not finished at all yet, so don't know why the game keeps doing that. We do get a key though, and it actually unlocks a chest up in Renala's chamber at Rhea Lucaria, containing the Dark Moon Ring. However, work still remains to be done down here, because just beyond these caves lies the Lake of Rot. Well, best get started. The Lake of Rot is exactly what it looks like. It's a lake, but of rot. Ah, but of course, this need not be painful. Just climb up on Torrent and ride through unharmed. Yeah, no, you can't ride him here. That said, there are ways to navigate through the lake without getting completely rotted from the inside out. Situated at various points all over the lake are these pillared platforms with pressure plates, and each one activated will raise up hidden sections of the ground to be safely walked on without fear of further rot build-up then death. Now, I'm a big fan of this level design, where you can gradually make the level less perilous by progressively venturing further out so that even if you do die, your next time through the level will be that much easier. It kinda reminds me of lighting the sconces in the gutter from Dark Souls 2 to gradually make it more navigable. That said, you're still almost certain to get afflicted with rot here, and curing it with a preserving bolus can just be a waste of resources if done too early, because you're probably going to get rotted again immediately after anyway, regardless of how nimble you try to be. At the end of this accursed lake lies the Grand Cloister with scores of pestilent kindred of rot, which I nearly always just run past because screw trying to dodge pest threads. Although there is a cool weapon here which actually causes scarlet rot buildup on attack, and several of this game's bosses are actually vulnerable to scarlet rot by the way. Just ahead there is a coffin, and just as the coffin at the waterfall basin carried us off to a new location, so does this one, down the rancid waterfall of rot to somewhere deeper still. Although the environment here appears nearly aquatic with its groves of luminescent coral, a far cry from the scarlet misery further above, any illusions of some serene new level to explore are quickly collapsed upon entering through the huge golden fog gate to be greeted by Astel, natural born of the void. Of course, this is the end point of the life cycle exhibited by the falling star beast and the malformed star, both of which will eventually develop into this enigmatic astral anomaly. To be sure, Astel has one of the wildest designs in the game, looking utterly unique compared to most other life forms throughout the lands between, and that's because it is quite literally not of this world at all, being a terror of some distant cosmic void. Astel will always fire off a thick beam of gravitational energy to kick off the fight, and it can take a bit of practice before you get the timing down to dodge this. It will also use this attack at will whenever at range from the player, something which will happen frequently due to Astel's ability to teleport around the arena. At medium range it will lash and beat down with its barbed tail, but up close the beast will freely make full use of its enormous pincers, as well as producing energetic ground shockwaves which can be very difficult to dodge. On my first and second playthroughs of this game, I always just considered Astel to be an incredible looking boss, though not terribly challenging and not actually that much fun to fight. But that changed when I took it on at level 1, where I grew to damn well hate this boss. Well, at least that was the case the first 30 times I died to it, and then, once I actually began to understand Astel and how to deal with its moves, I came to really appreciate it mechanically. It's one of those bosses where dodging alone sometimes does not cut it, with effective positioning also being crucial for defense, so as to avoid particularly troublesome attacks like his ground shockwave, and also for offense, so as to bait the boss into desirable attacks which will provide an opening. That said, I do not like its meteor attack at all, and it usually feels like luck whether or not I get hit by it. Like the Regal Ancestor Spirit and Fortisax, Astel is an optional boss, but does give a remembrance when beaten, although if you're going for the Age of the Stars ending, it is mandatory. Afterwards there's a very long elevator back up to the surface, and at the top is one of the most beautiful areas in the game, the Moonlight Altar, located at the otherwise inaccessible southwest of Liurnia. Although we're primarily here to conclude Ranni's questline, Moonlight Altar is surprisingly large with some tough enemies. In fact, it has perhaps the most challenging Evergaol encounter in the game, putting the player up against Electo, Black Knife Ringleader. Black Knife assassins are located in loads of places around the lands between, but this is by far the hardest, having a fuck ton of health, if you pardon my language, high damage output, and some very nasty attacks, a couple of which make use of Black Flame, thus doing extra damage to the player after the initial hit. I've fought, died, and then succeeded against Electo so many times on previous playthroughs that I'm actually really good at fighting her now, though this was certainly helped by how easily my Giant Crusher weapon staggered her. Beating her gets you one of the best Spirit Ashes in the game, Black Knife Tish, a very powerful summon which can be really useful against even the game's hardest bosses due to its Black Flame attacks. Our main destination here though is the cathedral up the hill here, but not before being besieged by Azula, the magic dragon, the same dragon who was guarding the way to Ranni's rise back into Three Sisters, though you can't actually kill it there. Azula's moveset is very similar to Smaragd's, who guarded the Glintstone key from before, and I'm proud to say that I somehow beat this dragon without taking a single hit. It's really not that much of a boast though, because like I said back in part 1, most dragons in this game share most of the same moves, although the ancient dragons like Fortisax and Lanziax are far more distinct. Proceeding into the cathedral and then down the large hole near the altar and a bit ahead brings us to one of the more grisly sights in the game, the broken, mangled remains of a Two Fingers, specifically Ranni's Two Fingers, the entity she was intended to be obeisant to before she broke off her control and chose her own destiny. We placed the Dark Moon ring on the finger of the doll before us, thus tying our destiny to that of Ranni's, who then appears to express her pleasure that we are the one who will be her consort. And with that romantic gesture, Ranni's questline is concluded, and after defeating the final boss, the Age of the Stars ending can be chosen. However, although the conditions for the ending are achieved at this point, you can travel back to Ranni's rise to see Blaidd hunched over in distress, talking to himself before entering into a frenzy and attacking the player. He's actually pretty damn tough to beat and wrecked me the first time, but the second time round I managed to put an end to the half-wolf, claiming his weapon and garb. Now this is pretty damn confusing because at no point in the game has Blaidd ever been remotely hostile to us, but discussing it with EG, he reveals that Blaidd was originally installed as Ranni's guardian, as her protector, as per Ranni's status as an Empyrean demigod. However, another of Blaidd's roles was to kill Ranni should she ever turn against the Golden Order, which is exactly what she so thoroughly did by dispatching her Two Fingers in so grisly a fashion, and thus, despite his loyalty to her, Blaidd went berserk against his own will and good nature. Although this is all well and good, I always felt that Blaidd was handled very poorly as a character here. I mean, you see him a bunch throughout the first third of the game, with him helping you achieve the quests given to you from Ranni, and then you beat Radagon, and then the next time you see him is way later here, where he abruptly attacks us outside Ranni's rise once our quest is done. But then, and I just found this out at the time of writing by the way, I learned that if you visit the Forlorn Hound Everjail, where we first helped Blaidd defeat Darrowil, then Blaidd himself is now trapped here, at the hands of his friend EG no less, and the conversation you can have with Blaidd here provides crucial context to his character and an excellent foreshadow for his later descent into violent frenzy. It's great, and made it all click way more for me because the way it turned out just didn't make sense without this context, the way we just don't see or hear from him for ages before he goes apeshit all of a sudden. But here's my issue with it. How the fuck would I ever know to visit this particular Everjail again? I've complained at length about how easily missable so many questlines are in Elden Ring, back in parts 1 and 2, but this one really takes the cake. There are certain character questlines that I've missed on one playthrough, but then chanced upon in another playthrough, which is great, but I think I could easily have played this game 20 times and never stumbled upon Blaidd being stuck in the Forlorn Hound Everjail. I love these characters, their dialogue, the voice acting, everything, but I really dislike how well hidden they made this extremely important development in the questline. It's possible that there was some clue elsewhere guiding the player back here, but if there is, I've missed it repeatedly over about 6 playthroughs of the game. Anyway, apologies for ending on a bit of a sour note there, but that's Ranni's questline finished, at least until we beat the final boss. Now that that loose end has been tied up, it's time to head back to Altus Plateau and then east beyond Leyndell before descending down to the Forbidden Lands. This is really more of a transition area, connecting Leyndell to the grand lift of road at the end, and I don't have a whole lot to say about it, but regardless, it does look nice with its thick bluish mists and the flowing red lights suspended in the air looking somewhat similar to the Guidance of Grace. Although all we're really doing here is moving through it, there is a Knight's Cavalry boss, and at the end, the second of the game's 2 Blackblade Kindreds, with the other one being found guarding the Bestial Sanctum, just as this one guards the Lift of Rold. And indeed, just as we first ascended to Altus Plateau, we now ascend far higher still, coming closer than ever to the top of the Erdtree with its golden branches hanging overhead. Although the game tricks you into thinking that you might be coming to the end of the game as you get closer to Leyndell and the Erdtree, the point where you reach the mountaintops of the giants is where it really sinks in that you are absolutely not yet done. This is an entirely new region to explore, with its own major boss, field bosses, minor dungeons and legacy dungeons. Near every inch of these high mountaintops lie blanketed by thick layers of snow. Blue ethereal ghost trees stand straight and tall next to their dead corporeal counterparts. Scores of once smouldering fire giants now hunch over, frozen stiff and impaled upon crude thorny spears. And just as the Erdtree stands towering and incandescent, visible from near any point on the mountaintops, in the distance, the forge of the giants is visible too, within which burns the flame which we will use to ignite the Erdtree. As cool as it is to have a whole new region to explore though, I must confess that around about this point in the game was where I kinda start to feel fatigue setting in back on my first playthrough. I mean, the region does look pretty great, and certainly looks rather distinct when compared to the other regions, which all of course feature very different colour palettes. But at the end of the day, it is yet another large open area containing the same sort of stuff you've mostly seen already. And the optional legacy dungeon here also looks very similar to the many other forts and castles in the game. Furthermore, with the exception of the fire prelates and the giant skeletons, both of which are incredible looking enemies, no doubt, every other enemy here is something you've already seen, except sometimes with a snowy reskin. Even the monstrous dogs and crows from Caelid are back, as well as the hand enemies from Caria Manor and Mount Gelmir, and the trolls are also back, except now they have fur. They look kind of adorable, actually. Having said that, I don't think this is a bad region in the slightest, and I've come to appreciate it much more on subsequent playthroughs, but you could tell that FromSoft were running out of steam a bit here, and that in turn can really make the player start running out of steam. After reaching the mountaintops and indulging in a bit of Erdtree gazing, it's not long at all before we see an old familiar hat. Of course, it's Yura, who we last saw way back in Limgrave after slaying our first dragon, except it's not really Yura. It's a different entity altogether, one only mentioned briefly in 2 or 3 short snippets of lore found in certain item descriptions. Shabriri, said to be the most reviled man in history due to his obsession with the flame of frenzy, a force with which he seeks to bring about into the world, enveloping it into the all-consuming fires of chaos, incinerating all that divides and distinguishes. Shabriri tries to convince the player to abandon the current plan, to use Melina to set the Erdtree aflame, instead using ourselves as a vessel, after first inheriting the flame of frenzy. Of course, I inherited the flame in part 2, however, as I said then, I went back and did that after finishing the game, just to show off and so that it would not interfere with me going for the Age of the Stars ending. Though I did just say the mountaintops are where the game arguably starts to lose steam a little bit, maybe. I'd be a dirty stinking liar if I was to try and claim that I wasn't fucking floored by the sight of the section just ahead, because guarded by a fire prelate and a morbid multitude of fire sorcerers stands a long stone walkway crossing a vast distance over a rocky chasm, and defended by a great bow-wielding guardian golem firing colossal missiles from the far side. It's parts like this that you'll really remember long after playing the game. Elden Ring's open world is huge, and it's not shy at all about just hitting you with these grand gargantuan scenes showing off the scale of its stunning regions. Being an entirely new region, there are a range of attractions here to check out, and one of my favourite such attractions lies to the northeast of the wide frozen lake, featuring not only ghost trees but many ghost animals too, just like in the Regal Ancestor Spirit Boss Arena. As you enter into the centre of the lake though, 3 alarm bells start ringing in quick succession. 1. The blue indicator to the left of the screen appears, indicating that you can summon a spirit if you like. 2. Your surroundings become shrouded in a thick icy fog, heavily limiting your visibility. And 3. A big fucking dragon shows up. Borealis is not one of the ancient dragons, and so its moveset is mostly the same as the other dragons of the game, much like Azula, who we beat earlier, except it uses ice instead of magic. Although the fight initially seems like it'll be a nightmare due to barely being able to actually see anything, the fog does soon go away, essentially just turning this into a regular old dragon fight. Still very cool encounter, pun intended. Jumping the Spirit Spring here and ascending up the path brings the player to Stargazer Ruins, which looks pretty much copy and pasted from every other ruins in the game, to be honest, and populated by some rather bland bat enemies. However, in one section of the ruins, floating next to some stairs leading downward, is a jellyfish, except not hostile. These jellyfish are found all over the Lands Between, with the blue variants simply minding their own business, happily floating about, while the red ones are hostile. But this one is actually an NPC, speaking in a very strong Welsh accent and inquiring as to the whereabouts of her sister. Now, due to me being somewhat of a dim-witted buffoon, it took me some time to figure out the solution the first time I came here, but way back in Limgrave, upon meeting Roderica in that shack on Storm Hill, she gives you a jellyfish spirit ash, the same one I used for beating Margaret. And if you happen to check out the item description for this, then you'll see it actually has a name, Aurelia, and is searching for her distant home, hinting that there's more to this spirit ash than simply being a summon to aid in battle, and indeed, using it here will lead to this rather touching scene. I really like quirky wee puzzles like this, although it was a little bit obtuse purely because at no point in the game's runtime thus far have we had to do anything like this with spirit ashes. You do get this cool talisman as a reward, but let's be honest, the real reward here is this gesture. Crossing the bridge to the large elevated area just north here leads to one of the coolest enemy encounters in the game, as an enormous skeleton torso claws its way out of the ground and starts shooting a beam of damaging ghost flame out of its eye socket. This guy will pop out the ground to damage the player and then retreat back underground, though it is fully vulnerable when exposed. And so you spend about a minute and a half depleting its health and he goes down, so all good, but no rune reward for beating it. Let's press on. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. Yeah, you're not meant to try to kill these things, because they are merely being summoned by a separate entity, and nestled down this path reveals a Tibia Mariner. Not a unique boss by any stretch of the imagination, and indeed we've actually seen these spooky boatmen on 3 other occasions, in Limgrave, Liurnia and Mount Gelmir, except there they summoned smaller skeleton soldiers instead of these big boys. The game does that thing again where it doesn't actually give it a boss health bar, even though it really is a boss, just like it did with the Liurnia Godskin Noble, but I guess this may have been done here to hide the fact that these skeletons are actually being summoned. To tell you the truth, I didn't even realise this enemy was here at all in my first playthrough, and ran through this area in terror. Beating the Mariner gets the player more death root and a very interesting weapon called the Helfin Steeple, and I'd highly advise people to check out a really great lore video by Crunchy where he discusses everything related to this esoteric topic at length. A minor Erdtree is also found here in the Mountaintops, though it's in a similarly appalling condition to the one we saw on Mount Gelmir. Nonetheless, it is still guarded by an Erdtree avatar, or should I say, 2 Erdtree avatars. At first, this fight seems like it's gonna fucking suck, but it's really not that bad. The player should be more than adept at handling the avatar's moveset by now. They don't have all that much HP, they both share a health pool, and the second one really isn't all that aggressive. Although there's no main legacy dungeon holding a demigod in this region, there is Castle Sol to the north, situated next to a mausoleum too. And while this level is optional, it's mandatory to fight through if you want the left half of the Haligtree secret medallion, with the first half of course being given to us back in Liurnia. As soon as you enter this place, you know you're in for some bullshit when the game throws not 1, but 2 Lion Guardians at you, though one does have only half its HP remaining at least. Castle Sol really is the same sort of thing we've already seen at Castle Morn and Castle Redbane, except the soldiers here are of the ghost variety, meaning that they can dematerialise and rematerialise a few metres away at will. There are banished knights here too, and I'd openly advocate for just running the hell past them when you can. They can be such a pain to fight thanks to the bullshit whirlwind attacks they do, that almost no one who even plays the game ever manages to dodge, including me. That said, there's no avoiding them in this area's boss fight, because up ahead we have Commander Niall, essentially Commander O'Neill from Caelid, except he engulfs his surroundings in damaging frost instead of rot. Furthermore, he'll always start off by summoning 2 banished knights, though thankfully the boss himself tends to not act too aggressively whilst these guys are alive. Although the design for the boss is heavily based on the earlier boss, to call him a reskin would be somewhat uncharitable, because he certainly does have some electrifying new attacks, making use of the bladed prosthetic on the end of his right leg for some really extravagant and terrifying lightning based manoeuvres, and thus he's much more mobile and challenging than Commander O'Neill. Still, I'm not a big fan of his AoE frost attacks, and while they are of course possible to evade, they really do take up nearly the entire arena. For beating him, you actually get his prosthesis, though to I'm sure everyone's disappointment upon equipping it, no, you can't attach it to your leg. But the real treasure of Castle Sol, and the real reason for coming so far north, is of course to obtain the left half of the Haligtree secret medallion. With this, we can go back to the Lift of Road and access the Consecrated Snowfields, and then from there, the Haligtree and Mohgwyn Palace. But that'll have to wait for part 4. I'm just joking, there will be no part 4, we'll get to those places later on in this video. Although we'd had our fun visiting all the fun attractions in the Mountaintops, we are of course here so as to reach the Forge of the Giants, sitting at the southeast corner of the region, and as we travel south across a giant snow-covered chain, we come ever closer to it, though first we need to pass through one of the most chaotic areas of the game. Out of all the other areas in this game, this is one I almost always just fucking run through, being overrun by birds, dogs, hands and trolls, though thankfully these enemies will happily fight amongst themselves, serving as an excellent distraction for the player to take a nice rest at the welcoming church yonder that way, only to be invaded. I used to detest this enemy so goddamn much, and that's because of his weapon of choice, Rivers of Blood. Of course, this weapon used to be an absolute fan favourite, both for PvE and PvP, thanks to its extremely powerful Ash of War, Corpse Piler, but unfortunately, to get it you first need to defeat Ordina here, who is also more than happy to dish out this brutal special skill himself, dealing massive damage and causing bleed build-up. Although it is tradition for me to get destroyed several times before winning against this guy, I actually managed to beat him first try here, and having a colossal weapon with such excellent stagger potential really helped. Now though, we are so close to the Forge of the Giants, but it's not simply a case of riding directly up to it, because it is guarded by the largest boss in the game, the Fire Giant, the last of its kind, with the remains of its dead kin frozen stiff in great numbers in the previous area. Although I love the cutscenes which precede nearly all this game's major bosses, I love even more the lack of a cutscene leading up to this fight, and how it doesn't even notice you at first. I think this is the most visually impressive boss in the game, not just because of its design and unconventional choice of weapon in the form of its enormous iron shield, but also because of how mobile it is and how it makes full use of the entire arena, rolling around the landscape, crushing trees under the weight of its enormous back, and bombarding the player with its destructive incantations. You used to be able to really take advantage of this mobility, because back in the game's earliest days it was possible to take out the boss by luring it to fall off this cliff, killing it outright from fall damage. You used to be able to do the exact same trick with Radagon 2 actually. Now, as I've mentioned a bunch of times now, I did a level 1 playthrough of the game last year, and though it was definitely a major challenge up until this point, Fire Giant was where it became hell. This boss was so fucking hard for me at level 1, because it's simply a one-hit KO if you get nailed by any attack. Thus, stuff like its fireball attack became terrifying for me, because while they simply do a bunch of damage on a normal playthrough, the slightest failure in timing at level 1 is simply death. No exaggeration, it must have taken me about 6 hours to beat him, at least. One attack I really don't like from this boss is his opening move where he sends a damn avalanche your way with a scoop of his shield, because although it looks like you can just jump it with your horse, sometimes I just fucking couldn't, even though Torrent appeared to clear the incoming wave. Even after 6 hours of attempts, I never fully figured this attack out, and not knowing whether I was going to be starting out this fight by getting hit before even getting to the boss added an extra element of frustration. As expected, the Fire Giant has one of the largest HP pools in the game, though mercifully his left ankle is a weak point, and so once you get good at phase 1, you can actually take off a good half of his health surprisingly quickly. Then phase 2 happens, and although I actually really like phase 1, I'm not quite so big a fan of the second phase. Now, he has no weak point other than his single elevated eye, and furthermore you no longer have the option to simply stay under him and attack while dodging the occasional foot stomp or shield swipe. Although the boss used some fire attacks before, now everything is doubled up, making those fast moving fireballs twice as difficult to dodge, not to mention the full on firestorm and fire breath attacks. Whereas before you had the weak ankle to attack for bonus damage, now that luxury is gone, and even though the fire giant's health bar will be shorter in phase 2 thanks to the damage it does to itself after ripping its own leg off, this phase always lasts much longer than the first for me. The best strategy I've found, though admittedly it really isn't all that great, is to linger directly in front of him to bait him into a forward attack with his arms or shoulder, getting a few hits and repeat, following him around the arena each time he rolls away. Truly one of the most epic bosses in the game, if not the most epic. It's not the best boss, but the pure spectacle of it, coupled with one of the best boss themes in the game, really does a lot to elevate it. But now, the Guardian standing in the way of the Forge of the Giants has been vanquished, and the way is clear. By the way, did anyone else not realise where to go up here at first, and just jump straight into the fire and die? Because I did. But that's not what you're supposed to do. You ride along the rim to the point of grace at the other end, and have your very last conversation with Melina, who preps the player on what they're about to do. That being, to commit the cardinal sin of setting the Erdtree itself on fire.
O Erdtree, you shall burn. Burn for the sake of the new Lord. Thank you for guiding me here. The one who walks alongside flame shall one day meet the road of destined death. Goodbye.
Afterwards, we wake in a completely different location, as far east as the map goes, in Crumbling Faram, Azula, but without the presence and guidance of Melina. Regarding Melina, the moment of her sacrificing herself to the Forge never really had that much of an emotional effect on me, and that's because we just don't see her that often throughout the game in meaningful ways. The only times you converse with her are at points of grace, particularly within churches where she often passes on the words of Queen Maliketh, providing exposition on the nature of the Tarnished. The issue is that such moments never really did very much to make me bond with her, and in fact such dialogue is often completely optional anyway. There are actually only a handful of times you even have to see and hear from Melina, but even if you're engaging with her at every possible opportunity, the game doesn't do enough to give her an actual presence. She's supposed to be travelling alongside you the whole time, at least in spirit, quite literally, but you don't really feel her, and so her sacrifice here always felt a little bit hollow to me. Similarly, the game also could have done more to give Torrent a bit more personality and presence. Nearly immediately after obtaining him back in Limgrave, Torrent simply became nothing more than a device for gaining mobility, rather than an animal friend with its own personality. I guess the fact we're playing a voiceless protagonist makes it harder to implement these sorts of relationships with other characters, but even so, as outstanding as Elden Ring's larger world building and lore is, it often falls short when it comes to depicting interpersonal relationships. However, the events at the Forge of the Giants really don't have all that much of an effect on the Erdtree. It is set alight, and indeed, travelling back to the Round Table Hold reveals that our actions have even had a similar effect on that place as it slowly begins to smoulder, but the tree still stands strong and tall, seemingly unaffected by the flames licking its branches, trunk and roots. This is because a final ingredient is required to finish the job so as to allow us entry through the thorns and into the base to gain an audience with a goddess, and that ingredient is to be found here in Crumbling Faram Azula, one of the most mysterious areas in the game. Faram Azula is essentially a floating circular stone city, except the constant violent tornadoes and winds have rendered it into a crumbling landscape of ruin. Perhaps 100 dragons endlessly circumnavigate this anomalous eastern zone of the lands between, and as well as this cyclonic draconic parade, Faram Azula is protected by a prison of floating crumbled stone. A very cool touch here, by the way, is that there's even small dragons depicted on the in-game map. Although this place is utterly different to anywhere else in this world, it does still occupy the same space as the rest of the game world, and indeed the Erdtree is still clearly visible from here, far off to the west. Although Faram Azula is a very large level, it still follows legacy dungeon rules, and so Torrent is not allowed here, though God knows he'd sure come in handy. A very nice touch is that from near the start, we gain a stark view of a grand domed coliseum, with this being the main destination we'll continue to work towards throughout the level, though the path to it is anything but straightforward. Looking at the tornadoes here makes me so uncomfortable, by the way. Not a bad way or anything, they're a great touch, but it actually causes me mild discomfort to look at them. I find tornadoes to be one of the most terrifying forces of nature. Thankfully though, we don't really get many of them here in Scotland, certainly not ones like this. With this clearly being an ancient place, appropriately we are greeted by an ancient dragon, though they didn't even give it a boss health bar, and its moveset is nearly identical to Lanziak's from Altus Plateau, except with an absolutely obscene amount of HP. I really didn't enjoy this fight. The camera made it difficult to keep track of the dragon's movements, it had too much health, and it killed me, and thus I hate it. There is a brand new enemy type here though, the Beastmen, of which there are several variants, and these are for sure one of the harder enemies in the game. Although the Mountaintops weren't exactly an easy region, Faram Azula really is a difficulty spike, and so by the time you get here, you're going to want to have your build all worked out to deal with these things. Because not only do they have long, wild, high damaging combos, but the game will absolutely throw many of them at you at once in some places, and thus you might find that all of a sudden the brute force method of just charging in and trying to take everything out in one or two hits just doesn't work anymore, and this will largely remain true for the remaining areas of the game. Faram Azula really is very big though, and not straightforward at all. The collapsed ruins and gravity-defying stone platforms that litter the city often aren't just for show, but can be used to traverse the level, leading to other sections hiding further challenge and treasure. The Beastmen enemies really do keep this level feeling fresh though it would have really sucked if they'd recycled earlier enemies again like they did to such an extent back on the Mountaintops. As well as the regular living Beastmen, there's also the undead variants which have to be hit an additional time after death to prevent them from reviving, and I actually think these are one of the best looking regular enemies in the game. I know they don't look as large and extreme as things like the crawfish or the rune bear, but the differences in their skull and general skeletal structure compared to the regular undead variants, coupled with the tatters of fur still clinging to their ancient bones, is just such a great touch. Also, some of them can breathe fire. Nice. Secluded off upon a stone platform situated after a bridge of toppled ruins stands our old friend, Alexander. You can actually summon him to help you out in the fire giant fight, and he even references the fire giant here, but I've never done this and don't even know where his summon sign is there. There will be no summoning him for help for some mighty demigod or fell giant here though, because sadly Alexander realises that he just doesn't have what it takes to be as strong a warrior as he desires, especially after seeing us take down foes like Radagon and the fire giant, and so his final wish is for us to enter into combat with him as a last warrior send-off. Something that's a bit of a shame here is that he's too easy to beat. Not sure if FromSoft did this intentionally to convey that he was just never all that strong, but but I would have preferred a bit of a challenge here so as to make this final battle with him a bit more impactful. Though I'd never gotten the chance to see him do this ground pound move before. Very cool attack. We get the Shard of Alexander for beating him, boosting the damage of Ashes of War by 15%. Very good talisman and only obtainable by finishing up his questline here. Although Beastmen are the most common enemy type here by far, unfortunately Worm Faces also make another grotesque appearance, and lots of them. I actually got quite cocky here because I was able to deplete their sizable health bars pretty quickly, barely giving them the chance to bathe the area in rotting clouds of deathblight. But sadly my cockiness came to a thorny end when I went up against the huge one at the end. This really is a cheap fucking fight, because there are two smaller Worm Faces too, which will also happily spray deathblight from their wriggling maws, and also the big Worm Eater just has far too much HP, just like the ancient dragon at the start of the level. There's something I don't like about a challenging enemy with a huge health pool but with a regular enemy health bar. Or maybe I'm just salty because I died here. Although there were certainly parts of the game before where simply running through an area seemed like the most prudent course of action rather than engaging every enemy you see, towards the end of the game here and in the optional hidden areas to come, the compulsion to just run the fuck past everything can crop up a lot more. Like I said before, the Mountaintops of the Giants is around about where I start to get a bit fatigued, and that fatigue does tend to stick around and grow throughout the rest of the game too, in no small part due to how bloody tanky the enemies get and how many of them the game starts throwing at you. Now, there happens to be a very unfortunate boss, which FromSoft saw fit to include in Faram Azula, and what's more, unlike the valiant gargoyles, it's completely mandatory. Folks, I am of course referring to the reviled, the detested, the abhorred Godskin Duo, also known as FromSoft's Great Sin. This boss sucks. On their own, either the Noble or Apostle are both very challenging enemies with tricky movesets, not to mention both of them having the ability to throw black flame fireballs from range. And then you've got the second phases of each boss. The Acolyte gains the ability to generate incinerating black flame tornadoes, not to mention the Noble's famous never-ending roll attack. Now, put both those bosses together in the same room. Okay, pretty shitty situation, huh? But if I just struggle enough to take out one of them, that halves the difficulty. Well, actually no it doesn't, because just a short time later, the one you killed will be summoned right back into the fight at full health. See, you're not just fighting these two particular enemies, you're fighting their shared health pool, just as was the case with the four kings in Dark Souls 1, except much worse. If you plan on fighting these guys solo without making use of any tricks or ingenious stratagems, then good fucking luck to you. Obviously it's possible, but it requires a serious level of skill and patience. However, and thank God for this, there is an alternate strat in the form of sleep pots. And with it being one of the few mechanics I haven't yet covered, I guess this is a good time to talk about crafting. As we all know, it's quite illegal to release an open world game without crafting mechanics, and thus this trendy feature was indeed brought over to Elden Ring too. I must confess that I wasn't particularly interested or excited at the prospect when I first learned that there'd be crafting, because I think it's one of those gameplay elements that devs tend to put in their games because they're supposed to put it in their games, because that's just what open world games do, and that instantly makes it less interesting to me. But regardless of the bloody philosophy behind it, anywhere you go on the lands between, you're going to be finding a hell of a lot of crafting materials, out in the open world, from vegetation, as a reward for killing non-hostile animals, as a reward for killing enemies, laying around on cave walls and glintstone in dungeons, and also situated at various points within legacy dungeons. There are many different crafting materials in Elden Ring, and many recipes with which to use them. Of course, these crafting recipes also need to be found or bought, many of which can be procured from nomad merchants, and while you'll have a fairly limited selection of crafting options near the start of the game, if you've been diligent in exploring the world, then you'll end up with a silly selection of items, throwables, consumables and ammunition to create from your stockpile of raw materials. So, my opinion on Elden Ring's crafting is this. Despite what I said a couple of minutes ago, I actually do like that it's here in the game, but having said that, I almost never felt the need to use it. I'd occasionally craft a few exalted meats to temporarily buff my damage output for a boss, and if I was using bows in a playthrough, then I would certainly be crafting large numbers of arrows. but that would usually be it. There are loads of different types of throwable pots, doing all sorts of different damage types and effects, some of which are certainly interesting and useful in specific situations, not to mention the admittedly awesome selection of different arrow and bolt types to be crafted. But regardless of how interesting the selection was, I simply rarely felt the need to engage with this game's crafting. Yes, all these volcano pots and albinoric pots and blood boil aromatics and dappled cured meats, they're all really cool options, I guess, but you just don't need to use them. But you see, it's not quite like you can completely ignore the crafting with it not having any further effect on the game, because it does have an impact on exploration. Many times when you're out exploring and you see some shiny item in some hard to reach location, you will go there, get excited at what cool weapon or piece of armour or golden rune or item you might get, only to get some rare crafting material that you already have 30 of and will likely never use. Seriously, this happens a lot, and of course that's not something that ever happened with the Souls games, because there was no crafting. All that said though, I do have to eat my words a little bit here, because one boss with a crafting sure as shit comes in handy is the Godskin Duo, because here you can make very good use of sleep pots. With these, all it takes is a well thrown pot at the feet of whichever Godskin prick you least want to engage with, then you're free to take on the other one in single combat. Fair. Yes, they will wake up, but it takes surprisingly long for this to happen, and you can always just lob over another sleep pot if need be. Is this method a tad cheap? I guess, a little bit, but if you're not supposed to use sleep pots for this purpose, then what the hell are you supposed to use them for? Also, the fucking boss is cheap, the boss sucks, so I make no apologies for my methods. At the end of Faram Azula, after fighting through scores of savage beastmen, leaping from cracked towers suspended at impossible angles in midair, and braving your way through red lightning, stormhawks, and more dragons, you will eventually come close to that large coliseum that was first visible from the start of the level, though it is guarded by the second of the game's 2 draconic tree sentinels. I won't go much into detail on the nature of this enemy's moveset because I already covered that in part 2, but I will say that this is a hard fucking enemy, and this one has an additional 5000 HP compared to the one we saw in Leyndell, not to mention massively buffed damage output, though its moveset is identical from what I can tell. I know I'm not the only one who died countless times on this boss before even setting foot into the actual boss arena, but even so, these are for sure one of my favourite enemies in the game, regardless of how much they always fuck me up. And of course, folks, that leads us into the main boss of the area, the Beast Clergyman, and on my first playthrough, this was around about the time where I started to get rather fed up. So, I actually really like phase 1 of the boss. I think the Beast Clergyman is great fun to fight, not at first, because like many bosses in this game it takes a lot of trial and error and dying before you'll properly start to learn its movement and moveset, but this is a really fun fight with a great rhythm to it and very little bullshit. Most of its attacks are quite comprehensible, and once I found out that this attack can be jumped over, it made me like this boss even more. But that's before phase 2 comes along. Look, I know that Maliketh happens to be many people's favourite boss in the game, not only mechanically but also as visual design, and I respect that. However, let me lay my cards on the table right now. I hate this boss. I hate having to fight it. I had such a shitty time with Maliketh on my first playthrough of the game that it negatively affected the rest of the playthrough. In fact, even now, despite me having so much additional experience with Elden Ring, I still have a miserable, frustrating time with Maliketh. Its moveset is just way too much for me to handle. The flips, the pirouettes, the black flame explosions, the travelling from one side of the arena to the other in a single second. For me, this is just too much. It's not a fun boss. When I fight Maliketh, I am actively having a bad time, and I just can't wait to beat it so that I don't need to fight it anymore. It's not due to inexperience either. Christ knows how many times I've fought it now, but it doesn't matter, I can't seem to not suck at it. Thankfully, FromSoft were fully aware of what a nightmare Maliketh is, and so there is an optional item you can get called the Blasphemous Claw. Unfortunately, I didn't get footage of it, but if you follow a wee bit of the Volcano Manor questline, then Bernal here will invade you at a nearby spot in Faram Azula, and beating him will get you the Blasphemous Claw. This item can be used to essentially parry Maliketh's attacks, except it doesn't work on every attack, not by a long shot, and furthermore it can be really difficult to discern what the proper timing on the parries should even be, especially when in the heat of battle with a flipping, spinning, twirling beastman like this. That said, when you do get off a successful deflection with the claw, it really does help, giving you a generous window to get off a good few attacks, and thank God this item exists, because it makes this boss just about manageable. To any Maliketh enthusiasts out there, I apologise if my words angered you, but nonetheless, these are my true feelings on the matter. I'm not even saying it's a bad boss, the main issue is that I'm bad at it. The reason we're even fighting Maliketh in the first place though is because we want to obtain and then unleash the power of Destined Death, also known as the Rune of Death. See, death is kind of a tricky subject in Elden Ring. Just as Ranni had Blaidd as her loyal beast shadow, Queen Marika had Maliketh, who sealed away the Rune of Death within his signature black sword, which he kept concealed within his own body. The act of sealing away Destined Death meant that the gods and demigods could now escape their destined fate, and indeed, another name which Marika goes by is Marika the Eternal. However, as we know, the Night of the Black Knives occurred where Ranni stole away a fragment of the Rune of Death from Maliketh, leading to the death of the soul of Godwyn and the death of Ranni's own godly flesh. As profound and shattering as Ranni's plots here was though, it was still only a fragment of the Rune of Death, but upon Maliketh's defeat here in Faram Azula, the true Rune of Death is unleashed back into the world and its effects are immediate.
The Rune of Death is unbound. And the lands between are shrouded by death's dark fate. But the flames will also burn the impenetrable thorns. Farewell it is then. You'll be Elden Lord yet.
Thus, while the Erdtree merely smouldered with weak embers after our actions at the Forge of Giants, it now blazes with an angry red incandescence, colouring the very air of the entire lands between with falling particles of red from the branches above, and desolating the Round Table hold. And although the two fingers are seen still standing erect in supposed correspondence with the greater will, finger reader Enya has passed away completely. All this makes you wonder whether we're really the good guys here, going through with all this immolation and devastation just to become Elden Lord. As we can see, due to the Erdtree's current condition, the royal capital of Leyndell is now the capital of Ash, now lying in utter ruin. Of course, some landmarks do remain, such as the eternal corpse of the great dragon Grandsax, as well as the bolt of Grandsax, but the golden capital is finished. Now we can press onwards through the capital and back up to the Erdtree Sanctuary to take on the game's final encounters, become Elden Lord and end the game. But we're not going to do that just yet, because there is far more work to be done elsewhere and bosses to beat. Then we come back and finish things. Our next main destination will be the Lift of Rold, where we can brandish the Haligtree secret medallion and ascend to the Consecrated Snowfields. You can actually get a very clear view of the snowfields from the Mountaintops region, and indeed, it's a pretty big freaking area. However, before we even go there, we ain't done with Crumbling Faram Azula, because though Maliketh was the main boss of the level, there's another one, hidden away in both place and time, and its name is Its name is Dragonlord Placidusax. Yet another boss that I initially completely missed, and who the hell could blame me considering how absurdly tucked away it is. Furthermore, the run back to this boss if you happen to die is uncharacteristically long for Elden Ring, with no nearby point of grace or stake of Marika, and so unfortunately there will be an extra 70 seconds added onto the front end of any fresh attempt on this boss if you die. Now, we've had many dragons pop up throughout the game, and I've covered many of them at length, and that although they have differences in theme and design, they tend to share many, if not most, of the same attacks. Well, Dragonlord Placidusax is a very different beast indeed, because this dragon is far more ancient and unique than anything we've seen thus far, even compared to Fortisax and Lanziax. Placidusax is so ancient that parts of its body look to be literally crumbling away, with many of its stony scales having long since falling off, revealing the golden flesh beneath. Even the boss's fire breath is bright gold, sharing both the colour and brightness of the Erdtree, though it makes frequent use of red lightning also, being capable of summoning exploding shockwaves of this ancient element nearly anywhere around this vast Colosseum. This is actually its most desirable attack though, giving you ample opportunity to get in close and deal some big damage, though lingering near this body for too long will tend to prompt a fierce retaliation in the form of Placidusax's signature golden flames. One of the Dragonlord's most awesome attacks, both visually and audibly, is its Bolt of Placidusax, essentially being a nuclear fucking detonation in the middle of the fight, so threatening that even the boss theme hushes in anticipation of the coming blast. Also, the form of the bolt should be very familiar because it's the same as the bolt of Grandsax that we saw in Leyndell, and happens to be the very weapon I was using to fight the boss. It's all rather poetic. These certainly aren't the only tricks the boss has at its disposal though, because at around the halfway point it will dissipate entirely, converting itself into cloud form before coming back into view again in mid-air as it gathers momentum before rapidly charging back down, swiping towards the player with a claw composed entirely of ancient red lightning, again and then again before finishing up the thunderous assault after one more burning breath of golden fire. But just when you think you've got its moveset down, leaving it with perhaps 25% HP remaining, it will deliver its most ruinous attack yet, heaving its vast form to the far side of the arena and causing violent, near inescapable fulminations throughout the arena from its relentless golden mouth lasers, though if you manage to survive this final desperate assault, then the Dragonlord should not pose too much of a further problem, eventually going down and concluding one of the most dramatic, thunderous and fun bosses in the game. And now, ladies and gentlemen, finally we are ready to make the trip to the Consecrated Snowfields via the Grand Lift of Rold through the use of the Haligtree secret medallion. It's not as straightforward as just taking the elevator directly there though, because we first need to make our way through a dungeon, and this one's actually pretty damn decent, looking at least a bit different to most other dungeons in the game, though the enemies here are still just the same old kind we've seen time and time again. There are some invisible paths here though, which will lead to some nice treasures, so it's nice that FromSoft did keep trying to make the dungeons feel at least somewhat fresh, even towards the end. But at the end of the dungeon, we emerge out into the frigid outskirts. The Consecrated Snowfields. Unfortunately, I can't see shit here, and this will remain the case for the first sizable portion of the area, though thankfully the weather does clear up somewhat as we travel further northward. With the visibility here being so bloody poor, I tend to do what I imagine many players do at this area and just ride through it as quickly as I can, because I can't see. Still, that doesn't mean that nothing hides in these blizzards, because female first generation Albinorics roam around here atop the back of savage direwolves the size of Torrent, and spirit versions of Dragonkin will appear from thin air to attack the player with almost no warning. To the west of the snowfields lies the Yellow Annex ruins, populated by cloaked trolls with the flames of frenzy glowing brightly in their eyes, warding off curious tarnished like myself. Just nearby the ruins though, there's a minor dungeon called the Yellow Annex Tunnel, and this one's actually pretty damn nice looking, as well as unique as far as I can tell. The same old enemies are here, but the ice theme is really cool and makes a nice change to the usual mine environments. A bit of a surprise for I imagine a lot of people though is the boss at the end, because it's Astel again. Now I've heard a lot of criticism over this repeated use of the Astel fight, because back when we fought the original version of the boss after the Lake of Rot, it was a special damn fight, with its bizarre and colourful yet morbid and unsettling design, only for FromSoft to repeat the boss again with almost exactly the same design and moveset. I also initially found this to be really lame, but that was before I found out about the relationship between these life forms and the other similar life forms we see in the lands between, and that rather than Astel being the name of the original boss, it makes more sense to think of Astel merely being the name of this type of being, of which there may be countless more still in the universe. I'm not saying they needed to include this thing here again, because I do think just one appearance of it was enough, same with the Ancestor Spirit really, but now I find its inclusion to not be as nonsensical as it first seemed. To the north we have yet another mausoleum, only this one is very different to the rest, but the difference is very subtle. Can you see the difference yet? It's hard to spot, I'll admit. Yeah, this one launches a near endless bombardment of large blue projectiles at you, like those fucking bugs from Starship Troopers. If any of you young whippersnappers watching haven't seen Starship Troopers before, please check it out and thank me later, and then watch RoboCop. I'll be honest, I don't really know what the intended method of getting past this mausoleum is supposed to be without taking a ton of damage, and even once I made it to the point of grace here, I came ball-clenchingly close to dying anyway. Within this church though sits an enormous albinoric woman, and though I haven't really spoken about her up until this point, we've been travelling with another albinoric woman named Loretta ever since first meeting her in Liurnia after getting the right half of the Haligtree secret medallion, and her request at the time was for us to bring her here to her sister within this secluded church so as to grant her a birth droplet, presumably providing a mechanism to allow the synthetically created albinorics to breed, perhaps even leading to a new, more advanced generation of albinorics, who will ideally look more attractive than the frogmen. Although the Consecrated Snowfields are a very large area in their own right, most people don't come here just to explore this place itself, but rather the two optional endgame areas it leads onto, those being Mohgwyn Palace and the Haligtree, so why not start with Mohgwyn Palace first. Situated at the westernmost edge of the snowfields, somewhat north of the Yellow Annex ruins, the player will be invaded by a sanguine noble, wielding a very dangerous Reduvia dagger, causing significant bleed build-up on hit, either from its projectiles or its edge. And speaking of blood, just nearby where the invasion occurred, a lone albinoric stands, staring straight at a portal pointing in the direction of some distant land to the southwest, and entering into this portal spits us back out at Mohgwyn Palace, the underground location we originally saw from down in Nokron. Unlike Nokron, Mohgwyn Palace is a far more open area, and we can in fact ride around on Torrent, and thank God for that, because this place is fucking intense. By far, the most common enemy type here are the second generation albinorics, though as well as the regular pale ones we've already seen previously, particularly in Liurnia. There's also a new variant here, whose skin has taken on the deep red hue of the blood lake which most of this area is immersed in. These ones act way crazier too, abruptly launching into frantic cartwheels as spikes protrude from their bulbous bodies, easily being capable of knocking the player from Torrent. They're basically Elden Ring's version of bone wheels, though thankfully you only ever see them in Mohgwyn Palace, and this isn't a massive area. In case you haven't worked it out yet, the theme here is blood, giving the level a very distinctive look, especially against the pseudo-galactic background which makes up the underground skybox. The giant skeletons are back also, but this time their source is far more obvious than it was on the Mountaintops, with them being summoned here by these horn-blowing albinorics. Although the swamp is a fair size and filled with many such dangers and treasures, there is also a legacy dungeon here in the form of the mausoleum leading to the palace, though this is an actual mausoleum in this case, not one of these thick boys. Whereas the pale and crimson albinorics populated the blood swamps below, the mausoleum is host to legions of blistered corpses who will violently charge at the player before exploding in a damaging red blood mist. There are so many of these shambling cadavers that it's useless to try and take them out in any great number, but instead to simply press on further up the mausoleum steps and into the pitch black caves ahead, where we are beset upon by sanguine nobles who rise up out of dark pools of blood with a violent fixation on exsanguination through the dexterous use of their cruel helix-shaped rapiers. As dark and dangerous as these caves are though, at least there is one friendly face here. At the other end, we're not far from the end point of the mausoleum, though if you're in the mood for a bit of a suicide run, feel free to go for the sombre ancient dragon smithing stone in the chest here. We're not here for any fancy treasures though, because at the top of the mausoleum proudly stands the high, columned palace of the Mohgwyn dynasty, and within rests the Lord of Blood and only remaining Omen demigod, Mohg.
Dearest Mikola, you must abide alone a while. Welcome, honored guest, to the birthplace of our dynasty.
Although we earlier fought Mohg in the shunning grounds, that was but a pale imitation of the true Lord of Blood, because this one is far more challenging, probably the third hardest boss in the game, with number 1 of course being the Lightning Ram from Altus Plateau. By the way, for anyone not aware, this is the same voice actor who played Tichigren from Dark Souls 2, and he also played this dude in the TV show Chernobyl, same guy. Mohg's first phase is largely the same as it was last time we fought him, with most of his attacks having long wind-ups coupled with even longer range, a deadly combination designed to catch out the panic roller. His Bloodflame Talon attack is a particularly fiendish one because the crimson mark he gouges into the air before him actually does 0 damage despite how nasty it looks. Instead, it's followed up by a damaging explosion directly after, meaning you need to fight your urge to roll when you see the attack come out and delay it by 1 second. Just as the Dragonkin Nokstella's Ice Lightning, or the Deathrite Bird's Ghost Flame do heavy upfront damage as well as causing frost build-up, Mohg's Bloodflame attacks also cause bleed build-up, and although the bleed build-up caused by any one attack will tend not to be too severe, it's the gradual accumulation of bleed build-up throughout the entire fight which makes it so deadly. An insanely cool touch that I fucking love in phase 1 is that Mohg will count down from 3 to 1 in Latin, cause invisible barred rings of blood to appear around the player, though having no immediate effect other than looking rather threatening. But in the transition to phase 2, the countdown is completed with a final 3 proclamations of nihil, which translates to nothing in Latin, doing heavy damage to the player with each brutal bloody stab into the air with his sacred spear weapon, also restoring large chunks of his own health in the process, much to the player's dismay. See, I actually consider this to be a very controversial decision on the part of FromSoft, because this is one of the few occasions in their modern games where they've included mandatory damage. Yes, you can heavily reduce this damage with the use of the Purifying Crimson Tear for your flask, but even with that, you will still take damage, just much less than normal, which I also don't like. Why not just make it so that it cancels out all damage from the attack? Instead, unless you've got a build strong enough to wipe Mohg out before he even has the chance to get to phase 2, you are taking unavoidable damage. And although I don't have a problem with it from a difficulty perspective, I do dislike it purely on principle, because with nearly every other attack in this game being avoidable through effective rolling and or positioning, why not just stay true to that principle entirely instead of letting this one slip through? That said, this doesn't even come close to spoiling the fight. I just feel like ranting sometimes. As tough as Mohg's first phase is, his second phase is absolutely hectic. And while his Bloodflame and Crimson conflagrations were troublesome before, now the area is drenched in a rancid red spray pouring from the trident tips of his sacred spear after every swipe, stab and twist. He becomes far more mobile too, flying and charging around the arena through the use of his dark wings, making it that much harder to catch a breather and heal, all the while trying to avoid the burning embers of blood flame soaking the floors of the palace. By the way, look at this fucking death. Do you have any idea how painful that was for me? Brutal. How shit is it when that happens? The boss is one hit from death and all of a sudden you just can't hit it and everything misses where you become more and more frantic and animated, both in game and in real life. And then you die. Truly one of the most intense fights in the game and just flat out really difficult. Mandatory damage grievances aside, I think Mohg is one of the best bosses in the game. The large figure whose hand is exposed from the white cocoon resting on top of the enormous pelvic bone belongs to none other than Miquella, brother to Malenia, and now that I think of it, half-brother to Mohg on the side of Queen Marika. Really makes what Mohg might have been doing to him in there seem that much more messed up. We actually learned of Mohg's abduction of Miquella way back in the intro slides of the game, though of course a new player has no way of understanding the meaning or significance behind that image, but essentially Mohg stole away Miquella from the base of his Haligtree in an attempt to make him his consort so as to raise himself to godhood. Clearly something went very wrong here though, as indicated by the appalling condition of Miquella inside his cocoon, looking far different to the golden haired child we saw at the start. Miquella is a very complex character who also has multiple identities, and I'm sure as shit not equipped to explain his whole deal with any level of competency. But again, I would direct folk who want to know more about him to Crunchy's detailed video on the subject, because unlike me, he knows what he's actually talking about when it comes to Elden Ring lore. With all this talk of Miquella, I think now is the perfect time to pay a visit to his hidden Haligtree, far to the north of the lands between, beyond the Consecrated Snowfields. Actually getting there though is no straightforward matter, however, and can only be achieved by first visiting a strange abandoned settlement to the north of the Snowfields, known as the liturgical town of Ordina. No, wait, it's the ordinal town of Liturgica. Actually, no, I was right the first time. It's the liturgical town of Ordina. Although at first there seems to be not all that much of interest here apart from a few treasures perhaps, as well as the rotten duelist standing at its outskirts, standing on this glowing circular seal, not unlike the ones used to enter into Everjails, will transport us into an alternate version of Liturgica. Ordina, sorry. Silly jokes aside though, this is one of the few sections of the game that I hate with a passion. I was partially apologetic in my disdain for Maliketh, but I make no apologies here. This place sucks. The goal is to light the 4 candles located at these Miquella statues dotted at awkward elevated places around the town, except one. Although taunt is permitted in the normal version of the town, you cannot light him here, necessitating the use of some obnoxious and unenjoyable platforming. 2. First generation Albinoric archers are situated on top of various roofs across the town, shooting 2 magical arrows at a time, each of which deal massive damage, sometimes with multiple Albinorics attacking you at once while you are attempting said platforming or climbing a ladder. And 3. If you fall onto the snowy ground below, there are several Black Knife assassins down there who are literally invisible. Now, that last point can be mitigated significantly through the use of the Sentry's Torch, purchasable from a merchant in Altus Plateau, but good goddamn luck figuring that shit out for yourself, and that's if you even purchase the torch in the first place from this random, easily missable merchant. Despite the admittedly impressive selection of torches in Elden Ring, obtaining them was never much of a priority for me, particularly one with so bland a name as Sentry's Torch. Seriously though, before I'd heard that it was possible to reveal the forms of the Black Knife assassins, I was in a near constant state of outrage and disbelief that FromSoft could be so callous and cruel. Forget the damn torch for a minute though, because even with it, this place is still no fun to play through, and I hate that I have to do it to get access to the Haligtree. I guess the idea was for you to work out the routes to get to each of the 4 candles in the regular unguarded version of the town first, and then try the alternate version afterwards, but whenever I'm here, I just want to not be here anymore, because this area is firmly over on the frustrating side of the difficulty spectrum. But after going through the whole ordeal and lighting the 4 candles, the seal is broken, allowing passage up these stairs and through the portal at the top, transporting the player directly on top of a branch of Miquella's Haligtree. Of all the optional areas in Elden Ring, I'm not sure there are any as impressive as the Haligtree, not to mention Elphael, which lies just beyond. This whole region, located just across the sea to the north of the mainland, was a massive surprise to me back on my first playthrough. Not because I necessarily had a super fun time playing through it, but because just when I thought I had the game well all figured out and had seen just about all there was to see, it turned out I had not. And not only did this hold true throughout my first playthrough, but also on subsequent ones where I always discover some new dungeon or boss or weapon that I previously didn't know even existed. Although the Haligtree is one of the most dangerous areas in the game, it also has a very soft beauty to it, particularly the way it stands against this vast misty backdrop of ocean to one side and coastline to the other. Elden Ring presents the juxtaposition of horror against backdrops of beauty and vice versa throughout the whole game world, and it gives the game a very compelling tone of moral ambiguity. Although this whole level is a decent size, it's effectively treated as a big legacy dungeon, much like Faram Azula, and so Torrent can't be used here. In this first section of the Haligtree, we are descending down extensive routes past heralds, ants and misbegotten, and through marbled, man-made structures constructed around the large trunk of the tree, though of course the Haligtree itself isn't anywhere near as vast as the Erdtree, being something of a failed imitation of it as attempted by the demigod Miquella, which he nourished and watered with his own Empyrean blood. Just as an aside, I've always loved these herald enemies. The design is just so intriguing, and it really makes me want to know more about them and what their bulbous clothing and headwear is hiding under there. And the way the sound of their horns complements the actual level soundtrack is absolutely beautiful. The same sort of thing is done in Leyndell too, not only with the heralds but also this page who I found playing the flute. Very nice auditory touches. Despite the sheer beauty and scale of this level though, as far as the enemies go, you will just be fighting the same ones you've already seen elsewhere. Although I do love the herald enemies, and though their aesthetic does fit this place, I kinda think they'd be more special if Leyndell was the only place you saw them, rather than them being repeated here too. At the end of the system of routes, structures and wooden bridges, there's an arena, with Loretta, Knight of the Haligtree, barring the way forward to the brace of the Haligtree. I discussed Loretta before when we fought her at the top of Caria Manor, but that was just her spirit form, whereas this is the real lady, and with some of the coolest armour in the game might I add, including on her horse. Can Torrent have that armour please, FromSoft? Again, several of her basic moves are the same we see from the Knight's Cavalry, Tree Sentinels and Draconic Tree Sentinels, except with a Carian sorcery twist, with her magic glintblade projectiles being one of her favourite moves, sometimes foiling dodge attempts as you manage to evade a projectile only to be caught out by the edge of her glaive. Her coolest move by far though is her triple slash in phase 2. This one used to catch me out because of how heavily delayed the third attack is. I don't have a whole lot to say about Loretta though, and I've never found this boss too tough. Other than on my level 1 run, I don't think I've ever actually died to her, but she is a solid enough boss. After the upper portion of the Haligtree and after Loretta, we enter a new area, which somehow manages to be even more striking than the one we just left. It's Elphael, Brace of the Haligtree. Good God folks, the first sight of this level always damn near takes my breath away. It's just so beautiful, with its towers and ramparts standing elegantly above the endless blue ocean below and into the horizon. All the while tiny red embers gently fall down from the now blazing Erdtree onto Miquella's Haligtree. There's a bizarre but really interesting combination of the normal and the putrid found in Elphael, with human knights fighting side by side with putrid avatars, while chambers hosting putrid crystallians lie adjacent to rooms guarded by clean-wrought knights armed with spears and halo scythes, all while rancid royal revenants stalk the streets below. Not to mention the kindred of rot which lie just a bit deeper into the brace. If this was out in Caelid or Limgrave, you get the feeling that all these entities would be enemies, perhaps engaging in battle while the player merely watched or rode by, as is often the case in other regions, but in Elphael they're all here together. I don't say all this to imply that this location is host to some force of moral good though, I mean, for one of the first enemies we see here eagerly sacrifices themselves upon sight of the player in a fit of fierce fanaticism, not unlike the halls of the Cathedral of the Deep from Dark Souls 3. As much of a spectacle as the top of the Haligtree is though, and as striking a structure as Elphael is, closer to the middle, our reason for coming here lies far further down at its roots, past the Clean Rot Knights, the Putrid Avatars, and the swamps of Scarlet Rot, all the way down to the very bottom where Malenia awaits.
I dreamt for so long. My flesh was dull gold, and my blood rotted. Corpse after corpse left in my wake. As I awaited his return. Heed my words. I am Malenia, Blade of Mikola. And I have never known defeat.
Malenia, perhaps the single most notorious, controversial and difficult boss that FromSoft ever created. Folks, let me be upfront with you. If you came here thinking that I might have a contrary view to what perhaps most people think of Malenia, then I'm sorry to disappoint you, but for me, this boss has always been a fucking nightmare. I'd like to start off with a story about an experience I had with Malenia. I've brought up my level 1 run many times throughout the series, not because I think it's how the game is supposed to be played, or because I think it's the correct perspective with which to judge the game, but because playing the game at such a low level with such a weak character really forces you to get to grips with enemy and boss behaviour in a way that just is not as necessary when playing the game at a normal, higher level with reasonable amounts of HP, stamina and everything else. Well, for my level 1 run, I did all remembrances, meaning that as well as the mandatory bosses, I also did some optional ones like the Regal Ancestor Spirit, Fortisax, Mohg, etc. Essentially any boss that gets you a remembrance for beating it, and I beat them all. To be honest, this was the hardest thing I've ever done in a game, by far. I'd done a level 4 challenge on Bloodborne and a level 1 challenge on Dark Souls 3, and those were extremely difficult for sure. Elden Ring was on another goddamn level, with bosses like the Fire Giant and Mohg requiring countless attempts over many, many hours before I eventually came out on top. Except, I didn't beat them all. I lied just now. There was actually one single remembrance boss that I never beat, and that was Malenia. Folks, over a 4-day period, starting after I'd finished work on the Friday, continuing through the weekend, and again after work on the Monday, I spent over 20 hours of my life attempting to beat Malenia on level 1, and I never managed to take her down. Of course, I've beaten her a bunch of times on regular runs, including this run, but I just wanted to share that anecdote so you're aware of my troubled past with this boss. Even apart from that ill-fated run though, back on my first playthrough I was straight up not enjoying Elden Ring at this point in the game. I'd started feeling a bit of fatigue at the Mountaintops of the Giants, and then this steadily grew throughout Faram Azula before growing a lot when going up against Maliketh, and by the time I was riding through the Consecrated Snowfields and into Mohgwyn Palace and the Haligtree, I was just playing the game to get it finished. And I was straight up having a bad fucking time when I got to Malenia, to the extent that I only originally beat her with the help of an online phantom. Although I started off loving Elden Ring, by the time I'd finished it, I considered it to be my least favourite FromSoft game due to how fatigued I'd gotten towards the last stretch of the game. But let me be clear, since then I've played through it again several times, and my second playthrough in particular was absolutely glorious. I had an incredible time the whole way through. I was way more diligent in exploring, and I didn't feel an ounce of fatigue even towards the end of the game. I had a much less traumatic experience with Malenia. Nonetheless, this is a very, very difficult boss. Although I started off attempting her here with my Dragon Greatclaw weapon, I soon realised this just wasn't cutting it, being too slow and simply not dealing enough damage or allowing for the level of aggression that this fight required. And so I changed my weapons of choice to the Bolt of Grandsax in my left hand and the Cross Naginata in my right, making use of the ridiculous damage possibilities of wielding two weapons of the same type in each hand. Doing this adds an extra attack to your moveset, allowing you to hit the enemy with both weapons simultaneously, and this was significantly faster and more effective than the sluggish colossal weapon I'd been using before. Aggression is extremely important in this fight, because as well as Malenia having a very challenging moveset, she will also restore a modest chunk of HP back every time she lands a hit, even if you're blocking with a shield, and even if that shield has 100% physical damage reduction. This aspect of Malenia means that unless you're playing perfectly, she can easily erase chunks of your progress in the fight if you fuck up and get hit. And way back in my earliest attempts at this boss, I remember being several minutes into the fight and her still being at about 85% HP, because anytime I'd do some damage, she would end up getting a hit in and just getting the health back, leading to some very frustrating experiences. This is why it's really important to not fuck around in this fight. You have to be aggressive, but to do that, you have to learn her moveset and how to deal with specific attacks. Her forward flurry attack used to be a colossal ball ache for me and would always catch me out. Plus, she uses this attack all the damn time, but then I learned that it's easily avoided by just rolling forward and right rather than rolling back. The first phase can be really fun and rhythmic once you start to get the hang of it. Although her moves are certainly challenging, they're perfectly manageable with a bit of practice. And then she does Waterfowl Dance. I hate Waterfowl Dance. There's not another attack in this game that I hate more than Waterfowl Dance. In fact, there's not another attack in any Soulsborne game that I hate more than it. I've looked up the tutorials, I've watched videos of people criticising it, praising it, analysing it. I fucking hate it, because despite my hundreds of attempts at this boss, I've never been able to consistently evade it. Sometimes I think I have, but then on the next attempt, she'll do the attack and I'll get cut to ribbons, and then the same thing will happen the next 3 attempts. For me, this attack ruins the fight, not least of all because she can start using it way earlier than seems appropriate. I've heard people praise it because it adds an extra layer of tension to the fight, making the player constantly wary of when she's going to do her signature leap up into the air before unleashing the attack. But for me, the knowledge that she can pull this attack off at any time after losing just, say, 30% or so of her HP simply makes the fight unpleasant. Because if she starts to wind up just as you're mid-attack or mid-heal, then have fun trying to avoid that shit. Honestly, I barely even try to avoid it nowadays, instead relying on a great shield for survival, though this means her restoring a sizable chunk of health. Look, I know the move can be dodged. I know it's not impossible or anything, but for me, this attack is unreasonably difficult to deal with, especially considering the insane amount of damage it does, usually being a damn death sentence. Of course, Phase 2 is also hellishly difficult, and Waterfowl Dance persists here too, except now it has the potential to infect you with Scarlet Rot. Great. In Phase 2 there are now delayed explosions of rot to deal with, as well as follow-up thrusts to some combos there to catch out players too conditioned to her Phase 1 moveset. Unfortunately, I'm not done bitching yet, because she has another attack I really dislike, and it's the one where she flies up into the air and sends her Scarlet Valkyries towards you. Very cool attack, but another one I've simply never been able to consistently dodge. There's just this constant unpleasant tension for me when fighting Malenia, because she can pull off these attacks at near any time, and if you're shit at being able to deal with them, then this fight is hell. All that said, I don't think Malenia is a bad boss or anything. I think she's mostly superb, even with her ability to restore health on hit, but goddamn, she has certain attacks that I just cannot stand that sadly prevent me from being able to actually enjoy the boss fight or beat it at level 1.
Your strength, extraordinary. The mark of a true lord. Oh, dear Mikola. Oh, dearest Mikola, my brother. I'm sorry. I finally met my match.
And finally, it is that time. It's time to make our way back to the capital of Ash and return to the Erdtree for the game's final epic confrontations. Before I do that, I know I didn't cover everything in the game. For example, I didn't engage much with the NPC questlines or go through the Dung Eater stuff, and there will definitely be some cool locations and bosses and even mechanics that I missed or skipped, but this commentary was never supposed to be exhaustive, and also I'm a bit exhausted. I jest, of course. This whole thing has been a goddamn pleasure to make, and I've genuinely loved it, and I do apologise if I didn't cover something that you might have liked to see, but I am eager to cover the game's final bosses, because one of them happens to be my number 1 favourite boss in the entire game. But that boss is not Gideon Ofnir, because this fight stinks. It's entirely possible to just railroad this guy in about 30 seconds, especially if you attack him while he's talking, but if you fuck it up here like I did and die and then actually have to fight him, I think there's an argument to be made for this being the single worst boss in the game, and I mean that. The nauseating ease with which he can utterly destroy you with his magic is just not enjoyable, and his Radagon's Rings of Light attack in particular is absurdly difficult to not get hit by. One aspect of the boss that I do admittedly love though is that his moveset will expand based on the bosses you've beaten beforehand. For example, some of you might not have even known that he could use the Scarlet Aeonia incantation, because in fact he doesn't use it at all unless you defeat Malenia before coming here to fight him. Same thing with his Blood Flame spray attack, which he only uses if you've beaten Mohg. He didn't use it here because I hadn't beaten Mohg at this point. Yeah, just so everybody knows, I did a lot of things totally out of order compared to the order shown in these videos. For example, the very last boss I beat was actually Placidusax. Back to Gideon though, I don't like him, and for the last time I'll bring up my level 1 run, because I'm not exaggerating when I say that he was one of the hardest bosses in that whole run, no word of a lie. Struggling on a boss can be frustrating, but struggling on a boss when it's Gideon Ofnir was a lesson in sustained humiliation. But with Gideon dispatched and out of the picture, we are free to once again approach the base of the Erdtree where we once fought the Omen King Morgott, except now someone else has arrived.
It's been a long while, Morgott. Long and hard didst thou fight, tarnished warrior, spurned by the grace of gold. Be assured the Elden Ring resteth close at hand. Alas, I am returned. To be granted audience once more. Upon my name as Godfrey, the first Elden Lord.
This scene is actually really touching because Godfrey is in fact Morgoth's father, as was he the father of Mohg, and so while it's easy to brush over, we've killed 2 of Godfrey's children at this point in the game. Another easily missable detail is the guidance of grace that flows from Godfrey to our own character, indicating that he has been guided in a similar manner as us, and Godfrey himself is a Tarnished too after all, not a demigod. But folks, lore aside for now, I fucking love this boss. So much. Some of my favourite bosses in the game are Godric, Mohg, the Draconic Tree Sentinel and Placidusax, but Godfrey has them all beat. He's the ultimate badass. There is no Bloodflame, Scarlet Rot, Red Lightning or Moonlight sorceries here when going up against Godfrey, because he is a pure physical powerhouse, making use of heavy slams and heaves from his great axe, interspersed with ground shaking stomps, followed by more relentless axe attacks. He is one of the most terrifying moves in the game too, where he slams his axe into the ground before unearthing it back up and bringing a strip of the freaking platform up with it. And this phase transition is so badass as he roars while performing one of the longest attack animations in FromSoft history before slamming the hilt of his axe into the ground, creating an arena-wide shockwave. The player can actually use this Ash of War too if they later get Godfrey's weapon.
Service. Siraj. I've given thee courtesy enough. Now I fight as Horaloo.
As great as Horaloo is, it's one of the most terrifying fights in the game due to how unreasonably aggressive he is. It can be so difficult to get a heal in, and despite the boss's low health by this point in the fight, it can still go on for surprisingly long simply because it's usually not safe to attack. Now the boss utilises grab attacks, and the timings of these are borderline impossible to interpret at first, specifically designed to induce frantic panic rolling before catching you out anyway with a brutal power bomb, and if you're unlucky enough to die to this attack, he literally rips your chest open. I'm generally not a big fan of such delayed attacks, but the boss is just too fucking sick for me to stay mad at. I can't stay mad at you, Godfrey. And I absolutely love the voice acting for him. In fact, all the voice acting in this game is top tier. With the first Elden Lord and our rival Godfrey defeated, the way inside the Erdtree is clear, with the impenetrable thorns from before having been burned away. Like Godfrey, Radagon is also one of the best bosses in the game, and one of the most challenging. Although his arsenal of attacks includes extensive delayed combos from his axe, he also makes frequent use of holy damage, with waves of golden light spilling out from his axe and body onto the ground before him, some of which will then detonate with delayed explosions. Around a third of the way into the fight, he will gain the ability to teleport around the arena, leaving exploding holy golden bolts in his wake. Talking about mobility, I think one of the coolest things about this boss is how he just walks everywhere. Yes, he does fly up into the air at points, but for most of the fight, Radagon simply walks around, adding an intriguing element of dignity and grace to the boss's design. Like Godfrey before him, several of his attacks can be jumped over to avoid damage, specifically his foot stomps, but he does have one attack that I really dislike, and that's a shame, because it's one of the coolest attacks in the game visually, his Elden Shattering attack. The reason I dislike it is that it so clearly looks like a jumpable attack, and yet even though I've had many attempts where I appear to time it perfectly and jump well clear of the golden wave he creates with his hammer, I will still get caught out by the attack. I realise I didn't do a great job in demonstrating my skill in this particular footage, but this is another of the small selection of attacks in Elden Ring that I don't quite understand and that I simply cannot consistently dodge. I know that people do suggest sticking very close to him during this attack and jumping or rolling past him in time with each slam, but I've never had much success with this either, and also his tracking when doing this attack is pretty ridiculous. Nonetheless, incredible boss, and I do love it. Just like FromSoft did with Sekiro, the final encounter is a double whammy, featuring both Radagon and the Elden Beast, and if you die to this living nebula, then it's all the way back to fight Radagon again, and that can get frustrating. Speaking of Radagon, the very sacred relic sword that the Elden Beast uses is literally made from Radagon's body, as indicated by its form and coloration, as well as its item description. This is not the hardest fight in the game, and nor does it even come close, but it certainly can be a tense challenge when you know you'll need to fight the previous boss all over again if you die, and also because you'll likely have used up a good few healing flasks, perhaps even most, if not all of them. Furthermore, Elden Beast can be very mobile, not in the sense that it's fast, but rather it will occasionally just submerge into the water and then emerge back out at the other end of the arena, and all you can do when this happens is to frantically run to where it's moved to, dodging its holy projectiles and sword beams along the way. Most of its attacks are fairly straightforward to dodge though, even the ever spectacular ringed explosion where the form of the Elden Ring appears in the air while rings of damaging holy light converge in on the player, but it has one particular attack which unfortunately has to be added onto the admittedly small pile of attacks in this game which are completely fucking bullshit. Elden Stars. This attack lingers for way too long. I believe it can cast 2 of them into the arena at the same time if you're particularly unlucky, and it is near guaranteed damage. Of course, people used to use Bloodhound Step to reliably avoid it, but then that Ash of War got heavily nerfed, and so when you see this attack, and you will see this attack unless you're strong enough to take out the boss extremely quickly at the start, there's a high chance that you'll take at least some damage, and just as was the case with the mandatory damage from the Mohg fight, I think that's a real shame. Some people hate this fight, and I definitely get that, but I think it's alright, though I think the general consensus towards it would be far more positive if you didn't need to fight Radagon again every time you lost to it. It must be really frustrating to get good enough to finally nail Radagon, only to get fucked over by the Elden Beast and be unable to finish the game. After it does finally go down, there are no more lords, gods or beasts to fight, and the only remaining action required of us is to choose our ending at the fractured form of Queen Marika.
The battle is over, I see. I do solemnly swear to every living being and every living soul. Now cometh the age of the stars. 1,000-year voyage under the wisdom of the moon. Here beginneth the chill night that encompasses all, reaching the great beyond. Into fear, doubt, and loneliness, as the path stretcheth into darkness. Well then, shall we? My fair consort eternal.
What exactly does this ending mean? Well, beats me, but it doesn't sound too positive, does it? Though I believe the excessively ominous tone of it is largely down to the way it was translated from the original Japanese text. And the whole translation issue really does add a bit of an arbitrary element to many interpretations of the lore, if the conclusions you come to about a particular character, location or event can differ depending on the way it was translated. That said, don't listen to me too much when it comes to the lore, because as I've stressed, I'm far from any sort of Elden Ring scholar. But folks, that is the end of the game and the end of this commentary series. When I started writing this on day one, I was actually going through a low point in my motivation for making videos, and I had no idea how to even start writing about a game as big as this. But after typing then retyping the opening paragraph for about half an hour, the rest spilled forth, and this series is what I ended up with. I hope you liked it, for whatever it was. I'm really not very good at writing conclusions, and nor do I find writing them to be very interesting, and I don't know what I can say here that I haven't already said at some point over the past 5 or so hours. But Elden Ring is a rare game, the likes of which we do not often see. Will it prove to be a game changer in the industry, influencing other open world games for years to come in the way that Dark Souls was so influential? I guess we'll see, and if it does happen, we'll also see whether or not that's even a good thing, because I for one think the vast majority of Souls-likes out there aren't very good or interesting at all, with the exception of the Neo series and Code Vein. That's right, Code Vein, I liked it. But folks, I'm rambling now, like a buffoon, so I think that's a good time to end it. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye, or rather, cheers for watching and cheerio.